was 15 years old when he died, and when investigators examined his body, they found something that didn't make sense. Timothy Ferguson weighed just 69 pounds, not 69 kilograms. Pounds. That's roughly the weight of an average 8-year-old child. But Timothy wasn't 8, he was a teenage boy. And the person responsible for what happened to him was the one person who was supposed to protect him. His own mother, Shanda Vander Ark. From the outside, nothing about the house in Michigan suggested horror. It looked ordinary. Quiet neighborhood, closed doors, normal life. But inside that home, Timothy's world had become something else entirely. For months, food was no longer nourishment. It was leverage. It was punishment. It was control. Timothy had recently moved back in with his mother after spending years with his father. That transition alone can be difficult for any teenager. New rules, new expectations, new dynamics. But what happened in that house went far beyond strict parenting. According to evidence later presented in court, Timothy was treated as a problem that needed to be managed. And the method chosen was starvation. It didn't start with visible collapse. It started gradually. Meals were restricted, portions reduced, privileges removed. Then came isolation. Timothy was often confined to a small bedroom, the door monitored, his access to the kitchen limited. If he asked for food, it could trigger punishment. If he took food without permission, the consequences escalated. Instead of proper meals, he was sometimes given slices of bread covered in extremely spicy hot sauce. On other occasions, he was forced to consume the hot sauce directly as discipline. Imagine being chronically hungry, your body already weak, and the only thing offered burns your mouth and stomach. The pain wasn't accidental. It was intentional. But Shanda wasn't acting alone. Police later recovered text messages between her and Timothy's older brother, Paul Ferguson. Those messages would become some of the most disturbing pieces of evidence in the trial. They showed coordination, instruction, awareness. Shanda wasn't unaware of Timothy's condition. She was directing the punishments in real time. In the texts, she told Paul when Timothy should stand for extended periods. She instructed him to use cold showers as discipline. She dictated when food should be withheld. There were updates about Timothy's behavior and responses that reinforced harsher treatment. At one point, when Timothy vomited after being forced to ingest hot sauce, the reaction in the messages was not concern. It was irritation and control. The focus wasn't his suffering, it was compliance. As weeks turned into months, Timothy's body began to deteriorate in ways that could no longer be hidden. Rapid weight loss, weakness, difficulty standing, his muscles wasting away, his face becoming gaunt. A 15-year-old boy slowly shrinking inside his own home. And yet, the punishments continued. Cold showers became routine. Standing for hours was described as correction. Food restriction remained the central weapon. This wasn't a single outburst of anger. It was structured, repeated, calculated over time, each day adding more strain to a body that was already failing. The most chilling part is that the messages show awareness. There were discussions about his physical state, observations about his weight, comments about his weakness. This wasn't ignorance. It wasn't confusion about what was happening to him. It was persistence despite the visible decline. By July of 2022, Timothy was severely malnourished. His body had been deprived of sufficient calories for an extended period. Starvation doesn't just make someone thin, it shuts down organs, it weakens the immune system, it lowers body temperature. It drains energy from the muscles, then from vital systems. It is a slow collapse from the inside out. On the day everything ended, Timothy had been in the bathroom for hours. He was extremely weak. According to reports, he collapsed. Eventually, Shanda called 911. On the phone, her tone was controlled. She reported that her son wasn't breathing. She framed it as sudden, unexpected. But when paramedics arrived, what they encountered told a different story. They didn't see a healthy teenager who had suddenly fallen ill. They saw severe emaciation, bones clearly visible, skin stretched thin, a body that had been deprived for far too long. His weight shocked first responders. It wasn't the result of a short-term sickness. It reflected prolonged neglect. Timothy was transported, but it was too late. He was pronounced dead. The autopsy findings would later confirm what the physical appearance already suggested. The cause of death was ruled as severe malnutrition and neglect. In simple terms, starvation. Not accidental, not unavoidable. The medical conclusion pointed towards sustained deprivation over time. And that's when investigators began digging deeper, because a 15-year-old doesn't reach 69 pounds overnight. There had to be history. There had to be warning signs. And there were. As investigators searched the home and analyzed digital evidence, the text messages between Shanda and Paul became central. They weren't vague. They weren't misunderstood. They were specific, detailed, time-stamped. They documented punishment schedules, food restrictions, standing durations, cold showers. They showed awareness of Timothy's declining condition. And most importantly, they showed that this wasn't chaos. It was controlled. In message after message, Timothy was discussed as if he were a behavioral project. Updates were sent about whether he had followed instructions, whether he had tried to get food, whether he had complained. And instead of concern about his physical state, the responses focused on tightening restrictions, increasing discipline, extending punishment. Investigators saw something else in those texts: tone. There was no panic about a starving child, no fear that something might be medically wrong, no urgent plan to seek help. There was consistency, reinforcement, strategy, and then came the interrogation. When Shanda sat across from detectives, her demeanor drew attention immediately. She was composed, calm, measured in her responses. She described the punishments as structure, as discipline, as necessary corrections for behavior. When asked about food restriction, she framed it as portion control. When confronted about the hot sauce, she minimized it. When detectives brought up Timothy's weight, she avoided direct acknowledgement of how severe it truly was. But investigators had already seen the photos. They had the autopsy report. They had the texts. They confronted her with the timeline, the months of restriction, the repeated denial of food, the cold showers, the standing for hours, the visible decline. And as the conversation continued, the gap between her explanation and the evidence grew wider. At one point, detectives emphasized a simple reality. Timothy didn't look like a healthy 15-year-old. He looked starved. There was no medical condition explaining sudden weight loss. No documented disease, no emergency treatment attempts, just sustained deprivation inside one household. The prosecution would later argue something powerful in court. This was not a sudden explosion of violence. It was a process, a prolonged series of decisions. Every day presented an opportunity to stop, to feed him properly, to seek medical help, to reverse course. And every day, those opportunities were ignored. During the trial, the jury saw the messages. They heard about the weight. They learned that Timothy had weighed around 69 pounds at death. They were shown evidence of the punishments, the cold showers, the forced standing, the bread with hot sauce. They heard how his body had been shutting down slowly, system by system. Starvation doesn't happen in silence. It comes with weakness, fatigue, physical signs that are impossible to miss when you live in the same house. The argument from the prosecution was simple. You cannot watch a 15-year-old shrink to half his healthy body weight and claim you didn't understand what was happening. The defense attempted to frame the situation differently. They suggested behavioral issues, parenting struggles, mismanagement rather than intent. But the messages complicated that narrative because they demonstrated awareness and direction, not confusion. When the verdict came in 2023, it was decisive. Shanda Vander Ark was found guilty of first-degree murder and child abuse. The court concluded that Timothy's death was the result of intentional actions over time, not an accident and not mere negligence. The sentence followed. life in prison without the possibility of parole. Paul Ferguson was also convicted for his role in the abuse, held accountable for participating in the punishments that contributed to Timothy's death. But even after sentencing, the case leaves a question that lingers long after the courtroom empties. How does something like this continue for months inside a home? Not one explosive moment, not one single night of rage, but a slow erosion of a child's body, a gradual fading, a daily decision to restrict, to punish, to withhold. Timothy didn't die from a sudden injury. He died from absence, from deprivation, from the removal of something every human being needs to survive: food, the most basic form of care. When first responders saw his body, they didn't see mystery. They saw prolonged suffering. When investigators read the texts, they didn't see confusion. They saw structure. And when the jury weighed the evidence, they didn't see a tragic misunderstanding. They saw intent carried out over time. A 15-year-old boy weighed less than many elementary school children, inside a house that looked normal from the outside. And that contrast is what makes this case so disturbing, because it forces a realization. Extreme harm doesn't always announce itself with chaos. Sometimes it unfolds quietly, behind closed doors, documented in text messages, reinforced day after day. And by the time the world sees it, it's already too late. Timothy Ferguson was 15 years old, and he never had the chance to grow up.
All right, thank you, Mr. Johnson. Ms. Vander Ark, do you wish to say anything prior to sentencing? Well, first and foremost, for the individuals here to speak on Timothy's behalf, I appreciate you being here. It kind of struck me throughout the trial, you know, who was here for Timothy. And at one point in time, I worried that we may not have anyone to give a victim impact statement. And that to me made me very sad, quite frankly. Horrified more than anything, but quite sad. And I'm happy that two individuals took time to be here from miles across the country. And out of the horrible situation, that makes me feel a little bit better. Not much, but a little bit better. You know, Mr. Johnson makes the same argument today that he made at the trial, that this was just negligence. This was her not understanding what was going on. She was really trying to do the punishment. She was trying to be a good parent, and she just didn't realize that Timothy was in such a horrible condition. And I found myself, especially during the closing argument, quite frankly, finding myself almost believing that. And afterwards, after the trial, I sat in my car after leaving that day, trying to understand, why I could feel that way. And what I realized is that I wanted to feel that way because I didn't want to accept the reality of the situation here. And the reality of the situation here is that this person, Ms. Vander Ark, you intentionally engaged in these acts. This wasn't negligence. This is not understanding why, but you intentionally did this with a goal. And I think Mr. Johnson's correct. I don't believe there was an intent to kill here, because you would have lost the very thing that you wanted to torture. Without him, you have no one to torture, except maybe the younger children. So I don't believe you intended to kill him. I think you intended to continue on torturing him for as long as you possibly could. The why, I don't know. But all the information that I have in front of me, and I sat down and really thought about this, and I looked over my notes from the trial, demonstrate that This wasn't negligence. This wasn't you not understanding what was going on. You look through, I read through every single text message of the exhibit, 2,000 plus pages, to try to understand what the heck was going through your mind. And what became entirely clear to me is that you knew exactly what you were doing. Immediately afterwards, when police arrived at the home, you immediately concoct this lie about he's been on a hunger strike. He was in the bed and I checked on him and I gave him some food and all this stuff. You got Paul involved in it. At one point in time, put baggy clothes on him. Put clothes on him to make sure, I guess, that he looks like he was actually wearing them, that he was hiding his poor condition, even though you already received text messages, weeks earlier of how bad he looked. You testified yourself how highly intelligent you were. In fact, that's the only thing that you testified to that I think was actually true. You were quite proud of that, boasting how intelligent you were. And not only that, but your actions in hiding this child. You hid him from his grandparents. You made sure that your other son, G, or little man as you call him, didn't see him. Those text messages talk about not wanting anyone to see him. I want to see him in that condition. You made sure that the garage was closed. When you sent him out there with no pants on to clean out the garage. I don't want to believe it because I don't understand. I can't wrap my mind. I've been trying now for this entire case to wrap my mind around about how somebody could do something so horrific, not only to another human being, but to their own child. I'm a father myself. I love my kids. I love them with unconditionally. But quite frankly, there's a mother's love that I've seen that is striking. And anybody who's a parent who's married, most mothers, and not all, but most mothers have such a strong love for their children. And to see what you did to your own child. I don't know if there's a word in the English language to describe how to describe it. I only can come up with just horrific. You intentionally and systematically tortured this child. And let's call it what it is. It's torture. You tortured this child. This wasn't punishment. This wasn't trying to curb his behavior. You tortured him. You monitored him obsessively. You all the things you did. I looked through every one of the messages. Bread with hot sauce, wall sits, up and down the stairs, sleep deprivation, ice baths, making him puke up food, monitoring his bathroom time, giving him 60 seconds in the bathroom if he went to urinated, or 5 minutes if he had a bowel movement. You made him sleep in the closet. You threatened to make him sleep in the garage. You put Tabasco directly in his mouth. You made him put his hands over the head. Made him work in the garage with no pants. And there's two other things that didn't come out in the trial that were in the messages. One, that there was talk of blindfolding him, depriving him of his physical sight as a punishment. And the last thing that struck me is just absolutely horrific in terms of your thinking. There was mentioning of giving him salt water as a punishment. One of the text messages talks about, hey, tell Paul or tell Tim that I'm not going to do the salt water punishment. And your reasoning for not punishing him was that, oh my God, we can't get him salt water, that could hurt him, that could kill him. But it was because you didn't want to give him another excuse to sit down on the toilet because he'd have diarrhea. He'd have diarrhea, and so he would have an excuse to sit down for a few more minutes while he was diarrhea from salt water. That was your excuse. That was your justification, not that it would hurt him. And you did so for what? Because of some punishment. You wanted to regulate his food, even though you yourself testified that he didn't really gain a lot of weight. toward the end of these text messages, you and Paul are talking about not wanting him to win. He's not going to win. I didn't allow pictures to be shown in open court of Timothy as he was when he died, because I didn't want people to remember him like that. Of all the things you took away from him, one thing I didn't want you to take away from him was at least some shred of dignity. And then I also thought, well, I'm a judge, I'm a human being. I don't know how to right this wrong. We try to do that. I try to do that from the bench every day. There's no way to right this wrong except impose a sentence that essentially takes away your freedom. And I thought to myself, what do I do? And I will tell you this. I am choosing not to remember your son dead, looking like a Holocaust victim, but I'm choosing to remember like that. And you can't even look at him. That's how he was. A beautiful child with a lot of life in his eyes. That's who your son was. And you took that from him. I'm choosing to remember him as a happy individual with life, not as an individual. And that's the picture I want people to remember of your son. You took that from him. You took it from him. For what reason, I don't know. Mr. Johnson's right. There is something broken in you. I don't know what that is, but it doesn't negate what you did here. So, besides remembering him like that, I'm not going to let you hide in the darkness anymore. People know what you are now. They know what you did. You're not able to hide in the darkness anymore. Timothy won. And he won because we know what you did to him now. It's not hidden anymore. We know who you are. That's the way that I'm going to honor him. You don't win because justice, thank God, in this case prevailed. I can't even imagine if you had been able to resuscitate him. He'd be still suffering. So if there's anything I'm grateful for, would be that he finally passed away so you couldn't continue to torture him like you did. It's a sentence of the court. First says to count 2, child abuse in the first degree. Court sentences you 50 years to 100 years in prison. Credit for 575 days. Court is exceeding guidelines in this case. The court finds that the amount of torture that I've indicated in terms of the long-term suffering that Mr. Ferguson, Timothy went through justifies on a reasonable grounds to depart from the guidelines. Used to be the standard was the guidelines. If the guidelines didn't take into consideration all the elements, I don't think they would take into consideration the amount of absolute systematic, consistent torture that you engaged in here. I think that's enough reasons to justify departing from the guidelines. There's a $68 state cost, $130 crime victim rights assessment. As to count 1, felony murder. It's a sentence of the court. You serve a term within the Michigan Department of Corrections for the rest of your natural life without parole. Again, there's credit for 575 days that you've already served. There's a $68 state cost. The crime victim assessment fee has already been assessed, and the court is going to assess a $450 public defender fee. Ms. Vander Ark, you have a right to file an application. You have a right to file an appeal. Request for this, if you are unable to afford an attorney, one will be appointed to a public expense. Request for the assistance of a lawyer must be made within 42 days from today's date. Clerk is handing you a form that you must complete. Return to court in that 42 days. Mr. Roberts.
Judge, just briefly, I believe you did indicate you would order that $5,000 in restitution.
Oh, I did. Thank you, Mr. Roberts. The court will order $5,000 in restitution at this time to the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services with the caveat that Mr. Johnson, you can certainly, if after the documentation, you can certainly ask for a restitution hearing and to contest that amount.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Anything else for the record, Mr. Roberts?
No, thank you, Judge.
Mr. Johnson?
No, sir.
All right, we're adjourned.